Has the International Olympic Committee succumbed to Russian pressure as it says the country's sporting stars won't face a blanket ban at Rio, despite allegations of a state-sponsored doping program? Good evening. The allegations couldn't have been more serious. For years, Moscow operated a doping racket to ensure sportsmen and women who'd used banned performance-enhancing drugs would escape detection. Yet today, after weeks of deliberations, the International Olympic Committee passed the buck, saying it wouldn't impose a blanket ban on Russian competitors at Rio in 12 days' time, leaving it up to the federations governing each sport. The IOC is accused of a failure of leadership. Also tonight, Munich mourns its young victims. As it emerges, the gunman planned his attack for a year. Motorists bound for the continent find ways to pass the time as extra immigration checks cause delays of up to 16 hours. Police insist the queues are now under control. Cycling might have been quicker as Chris Froome becomes the first Brit to manage a Tour de France hat-trick. Well, with just 12 days to go to the start of the Rio Games, the International Olympic Committee has decided not to enforce a blanket ban on Russia, despite overwhelming evidence of systematic doping violations. Russia's track and field athletes have already been barred, but now the other sports federations have less than a fortnight to come to their own decisions. Our sports reporter, Jordan Jarrett-Bryan, has this.
The sporting world held its breath for a decision that could have been the start of a doping clean-up. Instead, the International Olympic Committee have decided that no blanket ban for the Russian Federation will be imposed, and the IOC will leave it up to the individual sports governing bodies to decide if Russian competitors are clean and should be allowed to participate in Rio.
We have set the bar to the limit by establishing a number of very strict criteria which every Russian athlete will have to fulfill if he or she wants to participate in the Olympic Games Rio 2016.
Good morning, guys. Just walk in the room.
It was only a year ago Mo Farah walked into a press conference, stern-faced, angry and ready to defend his name amid allegations some athletes in his training camp were taking drugs. But now it's a relaxed and happy athlete before today's verdict that could have seen the entire Russian team banned from the Olympics.
We have to send out something, and at the same time, as I said, as a country, if we're doing something, then all countries should apply same things. I've always said that. But at the same time, I do genuinely feel sorry for the people who haven't done anything.
But have the authorities done all they can? The Russian sports minister is comfortable with the verdict.
We understand the difficulties of the discussion, and we are very aware that the Olympic Committee has to strike a balance between collective responsibility and the rights of the individual athletes. And in the end, they settled on the decision that any athlete with a clean reputation, with no doping record, has the right to take part in the Olympic Games.
Several former British athletes vented their responses and anger on social media, including Kelly Southerton, who expressed concern about the perception of the Olympics, James Cracknell saying the IOC have passed on the responsibility of dealing with the problem, and Sharon Davis, who claimed money was the priority over sport.
We've got to find an instrument which checks out how many athletes are cheating. At the moment, what happened nearly 20 years ago when we had the drug scandal in Tour de France, the World Anti-Doping Agency was set up, half funded by the International Olympic Committee, half funded by government. What has turned out is WADA, as it is called, is a regulatory body. It doesn't carry out the tests. You need an international police force that when a testing is done, it is not administered by the state in a particular way or by a certain body in a particular way, that it is a police force that can be trusted. At the moment, we don't have such a police force. We hope that those countries that do the tests do it properly.
The International Tennis Federation have already said all 7 Russian players are eligible after completing vigorous tests.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke via the internet to the former Olympic rower James Cracknell and the multi-gold medal winning Paralympian Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson. I asked James Cracknell if he was surprised by the decision.
I'd like to say yes, but sadly no. I think it's all too predictable that the IOC have tried to look strong by referring it to the governing bodies of the individual sports to make the final decision. But I think deep down they know the individual sports haven't got the money. Individual federations, the canoeing federation, haven't got the money in case athletes who are banned take legal action. So ultimately, many sports won't take the risk of their future and allow the athletes in.
Tanni, do you agree with that assessment, or is there an argument that actually it makes sense to, rather than tarring every athlete with the same brush, to leave it to the individual federations?
I just think, you know, with 12 days to go before the start of the Olympics, James is right. They either don't have the money or they don't have the time to take action. You know, most of the athletes will already be in Rio. You know, they'll be moving into the village fairly soon. So it just pushes it back to a decision post-Rio. And, you know, I just kind of wonder when, you know, the IOC is going to take a really hard stance on athletes who have failed tests.
Well, James, with just 12 days to go until Rio, inevitably, does it taint the whole Olympics, this?
It would taint it if Russian athletes were allowed to compete. If you think the IAAF first banned Russian athletes, that's the athletics, the track and field federation, first banned the Russian athletes in November. And the IOC have then pushed it to the other sports with 12 days to go. And you can't expect them to have gone through the arbitration process to make sure they are banning the right ones, or you have a blanket ban. And it's unfair to, you know, Russian athletes, some are going to be innocent and will suffer. But if you go back to 1980 and 84 with the boycotts, I don't think there was many Soviets who were given the option, Soviet athletes, whether they attended the Los Angeles games. So I think they're going to have to, in order to clean this up, as they did with cycling and as they did with selection process after host cities in Salt Lake City in 2002, they're going to have to make a stand. And yes, some innocent people are going to get caught in the process, but it's got to be a ground zero approach if you're going to have any credibility in any sport, if the Russians there.
Tanni, do you think that the IOC has been bullied by Vladimir Putin?
I think there probably has been some consideration given to the politics, because as much as we'd love to say politics and sport shouldn't be connected, they invariably are. So it ends up being, what are the IOC going to do? I mean, if I had a choice, I would say any athlete who's failed a test, they shouldn't be allowed to compete at the Olympics again, because we will have, across a huge number of sports, athletes who served a ban who will be there, who've done their 2 years or whatever it is. So, you know, what I'd do personally, you should be out of the Olympics or the Paralympics, because don't forget in all this there's been 35 positive missing samples from Paralympic sport, but also the personal coaches and the associated personnel, everyone around those athletes should be taken out of the major games, because at the minute, you know, for a lot of athletes, it's a risk worth taking. If the most you're going to get is a 2-year ban and you'll be able to come back to the next games, it's not going to stop people doing it. You know, personally, I'll take it a step further. I'd criminalise the use of performance-enhancing drugs in sport, and a lot of countries have that in place. I'd like to see us do it, but I'd like to see every other nation do it as well.
James, what do you think is the remedy?
Well, I think in going back to what Tanni said about the innocent people on the Russian team, you'll think about the people that may have their moments of competing, coming forth, and then subsequently a Russian athlete being banned. And I'm sure Tanni's the same. With my Olympic medals, I couldn't guarantee where they are in the house. But if you sat down and asked me what it was like winning the medal on that day, I can tell you that memory will never go. And for any athlete that is subsequently given a medal who wasn't able to celebrate it on that day, it's changed their life commercially and emotionally forever. And individual Russian athletes, some will be clean and will never have taken anything. But if it's a state-sponsored doping program, you have to stop the state going, not just one of the 26 sports.
Do you ever look back at any events you've competed in and question some of the Russians you competed against?
Not when I was a senior athlete, because you're racing the people, and you have to trust they're innocent or until they get proven guilty. And if you line up thinking they're guilty, or they're cheating, you're psychologically going to think that they're stronger than you. So the only time, though, I did question it was I was at the Under-18 World Championships, and it was the Soviet Union then. The Soviet guy next to me had a massive beard. And I remember thinking, you're not 18.
Tani, have you ever looked at individual races and thought there's something funny going on there?
I don't think I've experienced it, but until very recently, sort of doping in Paralympic sport was very minor. I mean, because actually the drugs are relatively easy to buy. It's the masking agents and, having the doctors help to get you through it, which is expensive to put in. So there probably hasn't been the money in Paralympic sport, but I think that's changed in the last couple of years. And if we don't do something now, it will come into force within Paralympic sports. So, but I've got lots of friends, as I'm sure James has, who, from other sports, who suffered that, who've had medals presented 2 years later in a sort of ceremony that is never the same. So, I've got enough friends in sport that have had their sporting careers wrecked by it. So, I don't want to see, unclean athletes being able to participate.
James Cracknell, Baroness Gray-Thompson, thank you both very much for joining me. Now, flowers have been laid for the victims of the Munich gun rampage as people gathered to remember the 9 people killed on Friday. Police say the teenage gunman had been planning his attack for a year. Ali David Somboli had visited the scene of a previous German massacre, a school shooting which took place in 2009. Jane Deeth reports.
Their killer didn't know them, but for some reason he hated them, perhaps because they were happy. Ali David Somboli was a loner, depressed and obsessed with mass killings. Today, outside the shopping centre where Somboli struck, raw grief, silent thoughts and tears. The young grieving the young. Some laying flowers were here on Friday evening.
I work at the supermarket. The police told me to go upstairs with my colleagues. Then I saw bodies on the ground and it was heartbreaking.
Somboli was filmed on a car park roof from nearby flats. This man begged him to stop.
He went over here and I shouted at him, "You're crazy. You belong in a psychiatric ward, you idiot." He said he was German. That's what he said.
Today, police and prosecutors revealed Somboli had been in psychiatric care last year.
During the search of his house, we found documents relating to medical treatment which point to an anxiety disorder and depression. He had received both inpatient and outpatient treatment.
They said the killer had bought his gun, which had been reactivated, on the hidden dark web, and that he'd been planning his atrocity for a year, since going to the scene of a 2009 school shooting in Winnenden, where a 17-year-old boy killed 15 people.
He visited Winnenden last year. We know that from photos found on his camera. He basically visited the crime scene and photographed it. So he's been very closely studying killing sprees.
Ali David Somboli went on virtual killing sprees in violent video games before murdering for real. But why? The police say the teenager wrote a manifesto before his attack. But for now, they're not disclosing what it says.
Police in southern Germany say that a Syrian asylum seeker has been arrested after a woman was killed and 2 other people injured in a machete attack. The attack took place in the city of Reutlingen near Stuttgart. A police statement said the man detained had been involved in previous injuries to others. Now, a senior Labour MP has accused a member of Jeremy Corbyn's staff of entering her House of Commons office without permission. Seema Malhotra, who quit the shadow cabinet last month in protest about Mr Corbyn's leadership, lodged a formal complaint with the Commons Speaker over what she says is a breach of parliamentary privilege. She said her staff felt harassed, intimidated and insecure.
The reason why we're so concerned is because this was done without our knowledge, without our permission. We have no idea who went into the office. We have no idea why they went into the office. Those are questions that are quite fundamental. And it matters also not just for privacy and parliamentary privilege, but for security and safety of our staff.
The Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, said the office manager concerned had simply been checking whether Ms Malhotra had moved out of the office after quitting Labour's front bench team. And he used the BBC's Andrew Marr show to make an extraordinary appeal to Labour supporters.
What camera am I? Okay. Am I on this camera? Let me just say let me just say this to Labour Party supporters, Labour members, members of the Parliamentary Labour Party. We've got to stop this now. There's a small group out there that are willing to destroy our party just to remove Jeremy Corbyn. We've got to stop them. We've got to unite. And if you want to come for me and Jeremy Corbyn, that's up to you. But don't pick on staff who can't defend themselves.
More than 20 people have been killed and dozens more wounded in 2 bomb attacks in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. Islamic State militants have admitted responsibility. Most of the victims came when a suicide bomber triggered his explosive vest at a security checkpoint on the entry to the Shia neighbourhood of Kadhimiya in the north of the city. Another 3 people were killed when a bomb exploded in an outdoor market in the western suburb of Abu Ghraib. And reports are coming in of another bomb attack in the Afghan capital, Kabul, tonight. First reports suggest that a rocket hit an empty school building in the diplomatic area of the city, causing no casualties. It follows yesterday's suicide bombing in which 80 people were killed. Funerals took place throughout the city as the Afghan authorities declared a national day of mourning. Now, delays for motorists heading towards Dover have eased tonight, but there are warnings of disruption to cross-channel travel for weeks to come. For the second night running, families were stranded in their cars on roads on the approach to the port, with delays over the weekend stretching to more than 10 hours in cases. But the backlog was eased after British Border Force officials were drafted in to work with their French counterparts today. Paul McNamara reports from Dover.
Get comfy. You might be here for some time. That's been the message to holidaymakers hoping to cross the channel from Dover this weekend. Miles of tailbacks, up to 16 hours of delays at some point. Increased security due to recent terror attacks plus increased traffic equals hours of waiting for the French passport control checks that happen on this side of the channel.
I've lost all sense of time and motion today. We've been stuck since, about 9 o'clock?
Yes, about 9, about 3 hours, I think.
Yeah. But we've made good friends with the people in the car behind us. We've been here so long. I'm thinking about changing my postal address.
It's taken me probably the last good 30 minutes to get from that roundabout down there to here.
So was any of this foreseeable? And just what is the government doing about it? Well, this man should know. Not only Tory chairman, but also a former transport minister.
We've already made, obviously, extra resources available from our own border force to help with the congestion and the travel movements. I think everybody can understand why the French authorities have upped their security levels. That was to be expected after the horrendous incident in Nice last week. But of course we all feel very sorry for those people who are just caught up in a traffic jam which they can't get out of.
But the delays this weekend go far beyond the increased pressures due to extra security. This is the busiest weekend of the year here in Dover. Schools have just broken up. Thousands upon thousands of Brits are heading to mainland Europe for their summer getaway. And yet, despite knowing all of that far in advance, at some points on Friday and Saturday, just under half of French passport booths were closed. This isn't entirely down to the French though. The local MP, a Conservative, thinks his own ministers are failing to do enough.
Originally it started off with the French border officials not manning the booths properly. But the Port of Dover warned the Home Office and Department for Transport of that developing situation. So our government should have been prepared for this. They should have planned for this. They didn't. And they owe the people who've been stuck in traffic jams for as long as 14 hours an apology.
Not everyone seems to want an apology. Some are making the most of it. And by this evening, delays were down to 1 hour. But of course, this is just the first weekend since schools broke up, and it could be a long, long summer ahead for anyone hoping to get on one of these.
2 men are reported to be in a serious but stable condition in hospital, and a 19-year-old man is still missing after a group of swimmers got into difficulty in the sea off Camber Sands in East Sussex. Coast Guard rescue helicopters and an RNLI lifeboat led the search for the missing man, while the 2 who were pulled from the water had to be resuscitated and taken to hospital after going into cardiac arrest. Leicestershire police are questioning a man and a woman over the death of a 5-year-old boy at a Midlands water park yesterday. The boy died at the Bosworth Water Park near Nuneaton. Reports on social media suggest that he was pulled from the water by an 11-year-old boy who was searching for his goggles in one of the pools on the site. A man has reportedly been found dead in a burned-out car in an area hit by wildfires northwest of Los Angeles in California. The fires, which have been burning since Friday, have already forced 1,500 families to be evacuated from their homes, with firefighters using helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft to help battle the flames. Now, Britain's Chris Froome has been crowned Tour de France champion for the 3rd time on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. The Kenyan-born rider completed the traditional procession into the French capital to become only the 8th man to win the race 3 times and the first Briton. Here's Jack Taylor.
I briefly had Team Sky here drinking beers.
Chris Froome is starting to make one of sport's toughest challenges look easy. And for the 3-time champion, the final stage of the Tour de France was easy. Tradition dictates the overall leader rides unchallenged the Champs-Élysées finish, a time to sample the local tipple and look back on a dramatic race. The Team Sky rider took the lead on stage 8. Despite a clash with a fan, a daring descent in the Pyrenees meant yellow was now the new black. But the true test of a champion was still to come. On stage 12, Froome and 2 other cyclists crashed into the back of a motorbike. It left Froome's own bike broken, and he was forced to run towards the finish on Mont Ventoux. After using 2 replacement bikes, Froome finally crossed the line. His efforts weren't in vain. Race officials ruled he would keep the overall lead. More crashes were to come, but one of sport's toughest competitors kept pedalling. And so to Paris, the city's spectacular landmarks welcoming the champion. Flanked by his teammates, Froome's joy and relief was clear. By crossing the finish line, he becomes the first British man to defend his title and only the 8th man to win the event 3 times. Cycling's dominant new force taking his place at the top of the podium.
Formula One now, and Britain's Lewis Hamilton has overtaken Nico Rosberg in the race for the world title after winning the Hungarian Grand Prix. Hamilton's victory gives him a 6-point lead over Rosberg, who finished 2nd. Daniel Ricciardo came 3rd. England's cricketers are on course to win the 2nd test against Pakistan at Old Trafford. England bowled out Pakistan for 198 on a rain-interrupted 3rd day. At the close, England were 98 for 1. That's a lead of 489 with 2 days left to play. Pakistan lead the 4-match series 1-0. Tonight's main news now. The International Olympic Committee has stopped short of a blanket ban on Russian competitors from the Rio Games, although track and field athletes have already been banned. With just 12 days to go before the start of the competition, the IOC has decided to leave it to the various authorities for the different sports to decide whether to introduce individual bans, despite overwhelming evidence of systematic Russian doping violations. That's all we've got time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Good evening.